She held the envelope like it was garbage. She didn't even open it. She just looked at my grandmother's handwriting on the front, looked at me, and said the words that I will never forget for the rest of my life. She said that whatever was inside didn't matter because Grandma Clara's accounts had been drained years ago, and everyone in the family knew it except me. She said I wasn't in the will, I was never going to be in the will, and I should stop embarrassing myself by pretending I had any real place in this family. Then she set the envelope on the kitchen counter, walked out of the room, and left me standing there alone. I stared at that envelope for a long time. Then I picked it up, opened it carefully, and read every single word my grandmother had written. And then I drove to the bank. Before this story goes any further, I need you to think about something. Has someone in your life ever looked at something that was meant for you and decided it wasn't worth your time before you ever got the chance to find out for yourself? Think about that while you listen to what happened next, because what was inside that envelope didn't just change my bank account. It changed everything I thought I knew about who my family really was and what I had been worth to them all along. My name is Ackles, and I was 26 years old the first time I understood that some people will never see you as family no matter how long you live under the same roof, no matter how many holidays you sit through, no matter how many times you swallow your feelings to keep the peace. I had been doing all of that for years, swallowing, adjusting, making myself smaller so the people around me could feel bigger. I was good at it by then. I had been practicing since I was 11 years old, which was when my father married Renata. Renata came into our lives with a smile that she wore like a costume. She wore it at the wedding. She wore it at parent-teacher conferences. She wore it every time my father's friends came over. But when the guests left and the lights went down and it was just the three of us in that house, the smile would disappear and something quieter and colder would take its place. It wasn't cruelty exactly, not the kind that leaves marks. It was something harder to explain and harder to fight. It was the kind of treatment that makes you feel invisible while everyone around you swears they can see you just fine. My father was not a bad man. I want to say that clearly because this story is not about making him into a villain. He was a good man who worked long hours and trusted the person he loved and believed that a quiet house meant a peaceful house. He didn't see what Renata was doing because Renata was very careful about when she did it. The meanness was always private. The dismissals were always whispered. The reminders that I didn't quite belong were always delivered when my father was at work or asleep or too tired to notice the difference in the air. I was not her daughter. That was the thing she came back to again and again without ever saying it plainly. I was my father's daughter from his first marriage, and my mother had passed away when I was 8 years old, which meant I had no one on that side to run to. Renata never said the words out loud. She didn't have to. She communicated it in other ways. The way she introduced me to her friends was one of the first signs I noticed. She would say, "This is Marcus's daughter, Ackles," like my father was the only connection I had to the household, like she was simply a bystander in my upbringing rather than the woman who had been signing my permission slips and packing my lunches since I was 11. She had 2 children of her own, twins named Denny and Petra, who were 3 years younger than me. Denny and Petra were the center of Renata's world in the way that felt physical, like gravity. Everything in the house bent toward them. The better bedroom, the new clothes before back to school, the bigger slice at dinner without anyone pointing it out. I told myself it was normal. I told myself that mothers always favor their own children and that I was being sensitive. I had a whole library of things I told myself back then. I was young and I needed peace more than I needed honesty. But as I got older, the things I noticed started to stack up in ways that couldn't be explained away by sensitivity. When I graduated high school with honors, Renata organized a celebration dinner. She booked the restaurant, she chose the menu, she invited everyone. At the dinner, she gave a toast. She talked for almost 4 minutes about how hard the past year had been for the whole family and how everyone had pulled together, and how Denny and Petra were going to have a wonderful future. My graduation was mentioned once, in a sentence, between 2 longer sentences about her children's upcoming summer program. My father squeezed my hand under the table. He had noticed, but he didn't say anything. He never said anything. That was the gap between us that I spent years trying not to look at directly. He saw more than Renata knew, and he said less than I needed. He was caught between 2 lives, and he chose the one that kept the house quiet. I understood it more as I got older, but understanding something doesn't always stop it from hurting. I moved out at 18. I went to a state school 2 hours away, paid my own way through scholarships and part-time work, and built a life that belonged entirely to me. During that time, the one person in my father's family who never made me feel like a burden was my grandmother, my father's mother, Grandma Clara. Grandma Clara was a woman who had raised 5 children largely on her own after my grandfather passed when my father was 12. She had worked as a seamstress, then as an alterations shop owner, then as the kind of community fixture who knew everyone's name and remembered everyone's birthday. She was sharp and warm and practical all at once. She didn't waste words or money or time, but she was generous in the ways that mattered. She remembered things. She showed up. She called me on my birthday at exactly 7 in the morning because she said that was the hour I had been born and she wanted to be the first voice I heard. When I was in college, Grandma Clara would send me little cards in the mail. Not texts, not emails. Cards with her handwriting inside, asking how my classes were going, reminding me to eat enough protein, telling me she was proud of me in the specific and detailed way that only someone who was actually watching could manage. She knew what I was studying. She knew the name of the professor whose class I had struggled with. She knew that I liked chamomile tea before bed. She paid attention to me in a way that made me feel like I was real. Renata didn't like Grandma Clara. She never said so directly, but you could feel it in the way she managed visits. When Grandma Clara came to the house, Renata was always busy with something in another room. When Grandma Clara called the house phone, Renata always said she'd pass along the message and then sometimes forgot. When my father wanted to visit his mother for holidays, there was always a scheduling conflict or a reason that made it difficult. And when Grandma Clara passed comments that were kind toward me specifically, Renata's face would do something small and tight that she thought no one was watching. I graduated from college and moved to a city about 4 hours from my hometown. I got a job in accounting, built up my savings carefully, and started putting together the kind of quiet, stable life I had always wanted. I called Grandma Clara every Sunday. She called me every Thursday. We had a rhythm. I visited her 3 or 4 times a year, which was more than my father managed in his own guilt-complicated schedule, and I brought her things she liked. Salted crackers. A particular kind of hand lotion. Magazines about gardening, even though she had given up the garden. By the time I was 25, Grandma Clara's health had started to slow down. She was 81 and the years were showing in her hands and her voice, but not in her mind. Her mind was still precise. She still knew the date and the names of everyone's children and the price of groceries and the exact balance in her savings account. She had managed her own finances for 60 years, and she was not about to let anyone else manage them for her. What I did not know, because Grandma Clara did not tell me until much later, was that Renata had been quietly working on a campaign for about 2 years leading up to Grandma Clara's final decline. Renata had started calling Grandma Clara more regularly, stopping by with food, bringing Denny and Petra along to help with yard work, presenting herself as the devoted daughter-in-law who was keeping an eye on things. She had also started spending more time with my father's siblings, particularly his older sister Marnell, who was the family organizer and had a lot of influence over how decisions got made. I didn't know any of this was happening at the scale it was happening because I was 4 hours away and because the information I got came in pieces. My father would mention that Renata had helped Grandma Clara with a doctor's appointment. Grandma Clara herself would mention that Renata had sent over a casserole. It all sounded normal. It all sounded like family doing what family does. I had no reason to read it as strategy. The first sign that something was shifting came about 8 months before Grandma Clara passed. I called on a Sunday the way I always did, and Grandma Clara's voice sounded different. Not sick, just careful. She asked me how work was going and I told her, and then she went quiet for a moment and said, "Ackles, I want you to know that I see you." I told her I knew that. She said, "No, I mean I really see you. All of it, everything you've done and everything you've carried. I want you to know." It didn't go unseen. I didn't know what she meant exactly at the time. I told her I loved her and she told me she loved me back, and we talked for another 30 minutes about nothing important, and then we hung up the way we always did. But I thought about those words for days. I want you to know it didn't go unseen. There was something in them that felt like preparation. Grandma Clara passed away 7 months after that phone call. She went quietly in her sleep at her own home, which was exactly how she would have wanted it. My father called me at 6 in the morning and I drove down the same day. When I arrived at the house, Renata was already there, which was not unusual because she lived closer. But when I walked in, something about the way she was moving through the space felt purposeful. She was not grieving, she was organizing. And she was moving between rooms with a kind of ownership that hadn't quite been hers before. The funeral arrangements came together over the next few days. My father's siblings, particularly Aunt Marnell, took charge of the service planning, and Renata inserted herself as the coordinator between Marnell and my father. She had opinions about the flowers and the readings and the reception menu. She was helpful in a way that also somehow communicated that she was the most important person present. I stayed quiet and helped where I was asked and spent as much time as I could alone with my grief, which was real and deep in a way I hadn't expected. On the third day, Aunt Marnell called a family meeting. This was the meeting about the estate. I sat down at the dining room table with my father, Renata, Aunt Marnell, 2 of my father's other siblings, and my cousins. Grandma Clara had a will. Everyone knew she had a will. What no one except Aunt Marnell knew was what was in it, because Grandma Clara had kept that information close. Aunt Marnell read through the major points. The house was to be sold and the proceeds divided among her 5 children, which was my father and his 4 siblings. Her personal belongings were divided carefully with specific items named for specific people. Her jewelry went to named grandchildren. Her sewing machine went to a neighbor who had learned under her. Her recipe books went to my father. These were the kinds of specific, thoughtful allocations that only someone who had paid close attention to the people in her life would make. And then Aunt Marnell mentioned a final provision. Grandma Clara had set aside individual amounts for each grandchild from her personal savings. She had 12 grandchildren across her 5 children. The amounts varied based on what she had determined each grandchild needed or deserved. And then Aunt Marnell said my name. She said that Grandma Clara had left a specific gift for Ackles, separate from the grandchild distributions, and that it would be sent directly in the form of a personal check by the estate. Renata's face moved. It was a very small movement, just a tightening around the eyes, but I saw it. My cousins got their amounts over the following week. I know because my cousin Jade texted me with a happy, excited message about hers. I was glad for her. I was also waiting. The check that Aunt Marnell had referenced didn't arrive right away, which I assumed was a matter of the estate's processing timeline. I was staying at my father's house during this period because I had taken a week off work and didn't want to leave my father alone too quickly. That was the week when things started to happen. On the 5th day of my stay, I was in the kitchen making coffee when the mail came through the slot in the front door. I went to collect it because I was closest. There was a stack of envelopes, and among them was one with the estate attorney's return address. My name was on the front. In the address line, it said clearly, Ackles, the given name my grandmother had always used for me even when the rest of the family shortened it to something more informal. That was how Grandma Clara wrote my name. She always used all of it. I picked up the envelope and I stood there for a moment looking at her attorney's return address and my full name in the address line, and I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as being spoken to from a distance, like she was still trying to reach me. Renata walked in from the hallway at that exact moment. She saw me holding the envelope. She walked over without being asked and looked at it and then looked at me. She said, "Let me see that," not as a question, as a statement. I handed it to her because I was still in that mode, the mode I had been in for 15 years, the mode where I handed things over to keep the peace. She looked at the return address. She turned the envelope over and looked at the back. And then she said something that landed in me like a stone dropped into still water. She said, "Grandma Clara's accounts have been drained for years. Everyone knows that, whatever is in this envelope. It isn't going to be what you're hoping for." She said it in the tone she reserved for moments when she was educating me on how things actually worked in this family. She set the envelope on the counter and said, "I wouldn't get your hopes up, Ackles. You're not even in the will in any real way. This is probably just a gesture." Then she walked out, and I stood in that kitchen for a long moment. I looked at the envelope. I thought about everything she had just said. I thought about the phrase, "You're not even in the will in any real way." I thought about how she had said, "Everyone knows," and I hadn't known. I thought about 15 years of being managed and dismissed and measured out in small doses. And then I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Grandma Clara, 2 pages front and back in her particular careful script, and folded inside the letter was a check. A personal check made out to me, signed by my grandmother, dated 3 months before her passing, for $15,000. I read the letter first. It took me a while because I had to stop several times. Grandma Clara wrote that she had loved me from the first moment she had held me as an infant, before my mother passed, before everything changed. She wrote that she had watched me grow into someone she was proud of, that she had watched me navigate a difficult situation with more grace than it deserved. She wrote that she had set this money aside specifically for me, separately, because she wanted it to be mine and only mine, and because she had wanted it handled before the estate got complicated. She wrote that she knew the family dynamics and she was not naive. She wrote that she trusted me to use it wisely. And she wrote that she loved me truly in the full specific way, not as an afterthought. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Then I looked at the check again. $15,000, her signature, my full name, the bank name printed on the check. Renata was standing in the doorway. I don't know when she had come back. She was watching me. When she saw me looking at the check, she walked closer. She glanced at the number. She said, "That's the amount," and something in her face shifted into something I can only describe as dismissive relief, like the number was small enough to not matter. She said Grandma Clara's checking account had very little left in it by the time she passed, and that check is probably going to bounce or be frozen by the estate, and you should talk to Marnell before you try to deposit it. She said it in a voice that was very calm and very certain and completely confident that I would listen. I looked at her for a moment, I said okay, she nodded and left the room again. I drove to the bank that afternoon. I had called ahead to make sure I understood the process for depositing an estate check. The woman I spoke to at the bank was patient and clear. She explained the verification process and what to expect. I brought the check, the letter, and my identification. I deposited the check. I did not call Renata. I did not ask Aunt Marnell. I did not wait for permission. The check cleared 3 business days later. $15,000 verified and cleared, sitting in my account. Grandma Clara's accounts had not been drained. Her checking account had been specifically funded for this purpose. The estate attorney later confirmed to me that the check had been prepared and signed during a documented period when Grandma Clara was in full legal capacity with a witness present. It was airtight. I did not tell Renata right away. I did not tell my father right away. I went back to my apartment, went back to my job, and I sat with what had happened for several weeks. I thought about Grandma Clara's letter. I thought about the word gesture, the way Renata had used it standing in that kitchen. I thought about all the years I had spent adjusting myself to fit into a space that had never truly been made for me. I want to be honest about what happened inside me during those weeks because the honest version is more complicated than anger. There was anger, yes, but there was also grief because Grandma Clara was gone and the check was proof of how much she had seen and I would never get to thank her properly. There was also something that felt like clarity, like a room with the lights finally on. I could see the shapes of things that had been in the dark for years. About 3 weeks after I got back to my apartment, my cousin Jade called me. She said she had heard something from Aunt Marnell, who had heard something from my father, which was that Renata had told my father that the check I had received wasn't going to clear and that I had probably got my hopes up and he should prepare to comfort me. Jade said Aunt Marnell had found this odd because she knew perfectly well that the check was funded. Jade asked me if the check had cleared. I told her yes. Jade went quiet and then she said, Ackles, Renata tall. Dear Dad, it was worthless. She told him to let you down easy. I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. She had told my father the check was worthless. She had stood in that kitchen and told me the check would probably bounce and that I shouldn't get my hopes up, and then she had gone and told my father the same thing, and she had been wrong on both counts, and she had known she was probably wrong, and she had said it anyway. That was the sentence I kept returning to. She had said it anyway. I decided to call my father that evening. I wanted to hear his version of what had happened. I called and he answered on the second ring. We talked for a few minutes about ordinary things and then I said, Dad, I need to tell you something about Grandma's check. He got quiet. I said the check cleared fully. It was $15,000 and it cleared 3 days after I deposited it. My father was silent for a long moment. And then he said, Renata said she thought it might not be real. I said, I know she did. He said, so it was real. I said, yes, Dad, it was real. She just didn't want me to know that. My father didn't respond to that last sentence. He moved past it. He said he was glad the money had come through and that Grandma Clara had always been thoughtful. And then the conversation ended the way those conversations usually ended, with a kind of silence that said he had heard me but wasn't ready to look at what I was really saying. I had known that was coming. It didn't hurt any less for being expected. What came next I hadn't expected. About a month after my call with my father, Renata called me directly. This was unusual. Renata and I had a relationship built on indirect communication. She sent me things through my father or through family group chats. She didn't call me personally unless there was a specific practical reason. So when I saw her name on my phone, I felt my pulse shift. I answered. She started the conversation with pleasantries which told me she wanted something. She asked about my job. She asked about my apartment. She mentioned that the twins, Denny and Petra, were doing well, and then, after all of that warm-up, she said the thing she had actually called to say. She said that there was a financial matter she and my father were dealing with related to the house, some repairs and a refinancing issue, and that they were short on funds temporarily, and she was wondering if I would be in a position to contribute to the household during this difficult time as a member of the family. She used that phrase, as a member of the family. I was quiet for long enough that she added, it would only be temporary and your father really needs the support right now, and I know Grandma Clara would have wanted the family to pull together. She used Grandma Clara's name as a reason I should give her money. I thought about the kitchen, I thought about the envelope sitting on the counter, I thought about the word gesture, I thought about she wouldn't want you to get your hopes up, and I thought about 3 business days. The amount of time it took for $15,000 to clear that Renata had told my father would never come. I told Renata that I needed to think about it. She said she understood and hoped I would consider the family's well-being. I said goodbye. I hung up. I didn't call her back that week. I thought carefully about what I was going to do, which was something Ackles from 5 years ago would not have done. Ackles from 5 years ago would have called back within 48 hours with a yes and a Venmo link and a private prayer that this would finally make her feel like she belonged. But I was not that Ackles anymore. Grandma Clara's letter had done something to me. It had reminded me of what it felt like to be seen clearly, and once you remember that feeling, it becomes very hard to accept its opposite. I called Aunt Marnell instead. I asked her some questions about the estate and about Grandma Clara's accounts and about the history of Renata's involvement in the family during those last 2 years. Aunt Marnell was direct with me in a way she hadn't been before. Maybe because she had also started to see things more clearly now that Grandma Clara was gone and the structure of the family was changing. Aunt Marnell told me that Renata had spent almost 2 years positioning herself as the primary caregiver and family liaison. She told me that Renata had made comments to several family members, suggesting that Grandma Clara's money would go to her immediate family because Ackles had moved away and wasn't really involved. She told me that Grandma Clara had been aware of what was happening and had handled her estate accordingly. That last sentence, Grandma Clara had been aware of what was happening and had handled her estate accordingly. I thought about the phone call 8 months before she passed. I want you to know it didn't go unseen. She had known. She had seen the strategy happening, Aru. Her, and she had quietly made her own moves the way she had survived everything else in her life. She didn't make noise. She didn't call a meeting. She just made sure the right people got what they were supposed to get in a way that couldn't be contested or intercepted. She had left me something that Renata could not stop, redirect, or explain away. She had put it in writing, had it witnessed, had funded it separately, and had mailed it directly to my address in the form of a personal letter so that no one else in the family would know the amount or the nature of what she had given me before I did. Grandma Clara had played 15 years of patience and come out ahead. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about her sewing shop, about the years she had spent building something one stitch at a time. She had always said that the work that lasts is the work that nobody sees until it's done. I hadn't understood what she meant when she said it. I was beginning to understand now. I did not give Renata the money she had called about. I sent a message through my father, not to Renata directly, because I had learned from watching her that indirect communication sometimes lands harder than direct confrontation. I told my father that I loved him and that I was glad to be his daughter, and that I was not in a position to contribute financially to household repairs at this time, but that I hoped the refinancing situation worked out. I did not mention the check. I did not mention the kitchen. I did not mention anything Renata had said. I just said no, warmly, clearly, once. My father called me back and asked if something was wrong. I told him nothing was wrong. I told him I had been thinking a lot about Grandma Clara and about what she had given me, not just the money but the example. He said he missed her. I said I did too. We stayed on the phone for a while after that without saying much. It was one of the more honest conversations we'd had in years. Renata did not call me again for 2 months. When she did, it was through the family group chat, which was where she preferred to operate when she wanted an audience. She posted a message about the upcoming anniversary of Grandma Clara's passing, saying the family should gather to remember her. She tagged everyone. She tagged me, and at the end of the message she added that she hoped everyone would come with an open heart and a willingness to support each other the way Grandma Clara would have wanted. I read that message 3 times. I noticed she had used Grandma Clara's name twice in one paragraph. I noticed she had phrased the event as something she was organizing, not something my father or Aunt Marnell was organizing. She was still positioning herself, still managing the image, still using the name of a woman she had spent 2 years maneuvering around as a tool to hold the family together in her preferred arrangement. I replied to the group chat. I said that I would be there. I said that Grandma Clara had meant a great deal to me and that I looked forward to remembering her with the family. That was all I said. Renata responded with a heart emoji. 3 cousins responded positively. My father said he was looking forward to it. In the weeks before the gathering, I did something I had been sitting with for a while. I pulled out Grandma Clara's letter. I had kept it in a folder in my desk, folded exactly the way she had sent it. I read it again slowly. I had read it probably 15 times by then, but each time I found something new. This time I noticed a paragraph near the bottom of the second page that I had skimmed over in my initial emotional state. Grandma Clara had written about the sewing shop. She said that when she first opened the shop, people told her it wouldn't last because she didn't have the right connections or the right name or the right neighborhood. She said she hadn't argued with them. She had just gone back to her table and kept working. She said the shop lasted 31 years. She said the people who told her it wouldn't last were not bad people. They just couldn't see what she could see. She wrote, Ackles, not everyone who underestimates you means harm. Some of them just don't know how to see past what's in front of them. Don't hate them, just keep working. That paragraph changed the way I was thinking about everything. I had spent weeks moving from grief into anger and from anger into something that looked like a plan. I had been calculating the right time and place to let the truth land publicly. I had been imagining the moment when Renata would have to face what she had done in front of people who mattered to both of us. And that paragraph from Grandma Clara walked me right out of that thinking. Not because what Renata had done didn't deserve consequences. It did, but because chasing those consequences loudly and publicly would have cost me energy and peace that I had only recently started to build. Grandma Clara hadn't argued with the people who doubted her. She had just gone back to her table. That was the whole lesson. She had saved her energy for the work, and the work had lasted 31 years while the doubt had lasted no time at all. I went to the family gathering. It was held at my father's house. Renata had decorated with photographs, which was actually a beautiful idea. Photos of Grandma Clara at different ages, young with her children, middle-aged at the shop, older at family gatherings. I looked at every single photograph and felt her presence in them the way you feel the warmth of a room someone just left. The gathering was peaceful. Extended family came who I hadn't seen in a while. Cousins I barely knew showed up. My father's siblings told stories. There was food that Grandma Clara used to make. Aunt Marnell gave a short speech. My father cried once and pretended he hadn't. At one point I was standing in the corner of the backyard near a rose bush that Grandma Clara had planted years ago and that my father had somehow kept alive, and Renata came to stand near me. We were alone for a moment. She looked at the rose bush. She said she really loved this garden. I said yes, she did. Renata was quiet for a moment and then she said, I know we haven't always been easy with each other. I looked at her. She said, I know things haven't always been fair. She didn't say more than that. She didn't say sorry. She didn't take anything back. But she also didn't say anything dishonest, which for Renata was its own kind of rare. I said, I know, and then I said, I have her letter if you ever want to know what she really thought about the family, not as a threat, just as a fact. Renata looked at me for a moment and something moved through her face that I couldn't read, and then she nodded and walked back toward the house. I stood by the rose bush for another few minutes. I thought about Grandma Clara standing in the same yard in a different decade, planting something that would still be alive after she was gone. I thought about her at the bank 3 months before she passed, signing a check for an amount that she had saved carefully and deliberately, writing my full name in the address line, sealing the envelope, and trusting that it would find me. I thought about what it means to be seen by someone who chooses to see you truly without agenda, and I felt something that was quiet and strong at the same time. The check had not been a gesture, it had been a message. It had been Grandma Clara's version of going back to the table and doing the work. It was 31 years of keeping a shop open. It was a rose bush in a backyard. It was 2 pages of handwriting in an envelope addressed to my full name because she had never shortened me to fit anyone else's comfort. I drove home that evening with the windows down. I thought about what I was going to do with the money. I had ideas. Responsible ones, the kind Grandma Clara would have approved of. A portion went into an emergency fund because she had always told me that freedom starts with 3 months of breathing room. A portion went into a retirement account I had been putting off opening. A portion I set aside for a plan I had been forming slowly for months, a small business idea in the accounting field that I had been too afraid to start and too financially cautious to risk. Grandma Clara had not told me what to do with the money. She had trusted me to know. That trust felt like something I needed to honor carefully. Over the following months, I moved steadily toward that business idea. I worked on it quietly in the evenings and on weekends. I did not announce it. I did not post about it. I just went back to the table the way she had shown me and kept working. I built a small client base through word of mouth. I registered the business. I set up the accounts. I moved slowly and carefully, and I did not rush anything. Renata called again in the new year. This time she was more direct. She said that Denny was struggling financially and that the family was going to try to come together to support him, and she thought it would be a meaningful gesture if I contributed since I had received money from the estate. She said it would show that I was really part of the family. I need to describe how I felt when I heard that sentence, really part of the family, because it is the kind of sentence that would have worked on me once. It would have cracked something open. It would have reached directly into the place where I had kept my oldest and most stubborn hope, the hope that one more act of generosity would finally make them see me, and it would have worked. I would have sent money. I would have said yes. I would have done it and felt relief, and then nothing would have changed. But something was different now. Grandma Clara's letter was sitting in my desk, and the check had cleared, and my business had its first 3 clients, and I had been sleeping better than I had in years. I was not the me person who had stood in that kitchen holding an envelope and handed it to Renata without being asked. I had learned to hold things that were mine. I told Renata that I wasn't going to be able to contribute. I told her I was managing my own financial goals right now and that I was sure the family would find a way to support Denny through other means. She said, "I thought you cared about this family." I said, "I do care about my father. We can end the call there if you want." She was quiet, then she hung up. My father called me an hour later. He said he had heard I declined to help with Denny's situation. I said, "Yes, that's right." He said he was disappointed. I told him I understood and that I loved him and that my financial choices were mine to make. He said, "Yes, they are," and then neither of us said anything for a moment, and then my father said something that surprised me. He said, "Your grandmother would be proud of you, Ackles." I said, "I know, Dad. She already told me." After that conversation, the family dynamics shifted. Not dramatically, not in the way that makes for a clean ending in a story. Life doesn't usually do that, but things shifted in the way that real things shift, slowly and with friction. Renata stopped calling me directly. The family group chat became less of a pressure tool and more of a neutral information channel. My father started calling me more often just to talk without a specific agenda. Those calls were good. They were the most honest conversations we'd had since I was a teenager. My business grew. By the end of the first year, I had 11 regular clients. By 18 months in, I had hired my first part-time contractor. I didn't announce the milestones publicly. I just kept working. I would think about Grandma Clara sometimes while I was sitting at my desk late in the evening, going over numbers, building something one careful decision at a time. I would think about what she had written about the people who told her the shop wouldn't last. They just couldn't see what she could see. I could see it now. That was the thing. I could finally see what was mine and hold it clearly and build it honestly without asking anyone else's permission or waiting for their acknowledgement. I didn't need Renata to say I had done well. I didn't need the family group chat to celebrate me. I had a business and a letter and a rosebush still growing in my father's backyard and the memory of a woman who had seen me from the very beginning and had quietly made sure I knew it. Denny, interestingly, called me about 9 months after the incident with Renata's request. He called on a Sunday afternoon, which made me think of Grandma Clara's Sunday calls. He said he'd been going through a hard time financially and that he knew his mother had asked me for help and that I'd said no and that he wanted to say he didn't blame me. He said he knew his mother could be a lot sometimes. He said it exactly like that. A lot. The word carried weight. I thanked him for calling. He asked if we could have lunch sometime. I said yes. We did, about 3 weeks later. It was awkward and honest in equal measure, which felt about right for two people who had grown up in the same house without growing up together. Petra never reached out. That was okay. Some things find their resolution and some things just find their distance, and distance is sometimes the more honest outcome. Aunt Marnell sent me a card on the 1-year anniversary of Grandma Clara's passing. Inside she had written, "She was proud of you, Ackles. So am I." I kept that card in the same folder as the letter. My father came to visit me at my apartment about 1.5 years after everything. He had never been to my apartment before. Renata hadn't come. He arrived with a jar of the salted crackers that Grandma Clara had always liked because he said he had found a large supply of them while cleaning out a closet and he thought I should have some. I made tea. We sat at my kitchen table and talked for 3 hours. It was the longest uninterrupted conversation we had ever had. He talked about my mother. He talked about the years he had spent trying to hold two versions of family together. He said he hadn't always done it well. I said I knew. He said he was sorry. I said I knew that too. I didn't tell him everything I had figured out. Not because I was protecting Renata, but because I had realized that some things didn't need to be said to be understood. My father understood more than he had ever let on. His silence over the years had not been ignorance. It had been a different kind of cost, one he had chosen to carry, and that was between him and his own conscience in ways that were not mine to manage. What I could do was be his daughter, honestly, without the old performance of trying to earn my place at his table. I was already there. Grandma Clara had told me so in 2 handwritten pages that I kept in a folder in my desk next to a cleared deposit receipt for $15,000 that someone had once called worthless. I want to say one more thing about Grandma Clara before the story ends because I think it matters. She did not save me with $15,000. I want to be honest about that. The money was real and it helped and it was the seed of something bigger, but that wasn't the real gift. The real gift was the letter. The real gift was the specific, careful words of a woman who had been watching me for 26 years and had decided to say what she saw before she ran out of time to say it. The money was the envelope. The letter was the thing inside. She saw me when the people I was trying the hardest to be seen by looked right through me. She documented it. She witnessed it. She funded it. She mailed it. She made it impossible to dismiss or delay or redirect. She gave me what she had given herself all those years, the proof, sealed and signed, that the work was real and it mattered and it had not gone unseen. I deposited the check, I read the letter, I went back to my table and I kept working. If you have ever had someone in your life who truly saw you, not because it was convenient for them, not because you had earned it through the right performance, but just because they were paying attention and what they saw was worth something to them, I want to hear about it. And if you have ever been the person standing in a kitchen holding something that was yours while someone tried to tell you it wasn't worth much, I want to hear about that too. Leave it in the comments. Tell me where you are in your own story. Because Ackles' story is not really about a check. It is about knowing what is yours and choosing to believe in it before anyone else gives you permission.